We are back. It's been a busy week. Last week was a busy week. You got into a few internet arguments, big surprise. Some of those were actually really good arguments. Some of those had almost no weight to them. They were kind of baseless or they were like air. You were basically, you were old man yells at cloud. But there were some really good discussions. One actually happened yesterday, based on when we're recording. That was with Spiro Florolopoulos. I did not say that correctly, but we'll link to that. And you went for 5 hours, but it was a fantastic conversation. I think people who want to get into the details, you also talked about some related tech, right? Like game development. I was washing the dishes, but I had it on the background and it was still kind of interesting. But then you came back to Datastar. So lots to listen to there. What else happened? We released beta 3. And beta 3 was kind of minor, but we had a few like significant things in there, I would say. I think of it as the changes we made were kind of like tweaking the engine. Um, I used to work, I used to do a lot of motorcycle maintenance in my younger days. And I think of it like a carburetor versus a fuel injection system, right? Like a carburetor controls the mix of fuel and air that gets into the engine. And we kind of upgraded part of the engine to be more like a fuel injection system where we're much more exact and precise about uh, that mix that gets into the engine. And what I mean by that is that we're using Mutation Observer to be able to decide when to reapply plugins rather than do the whole thing over and over again, if that makes sense. I don't know if that's a good analogy. If I guess you know what I'm saying, but I don't know if the general listener will.
Well, one of the problems that's kind of basically since day one, there's a certain set of situations where it's really hard to get the life cycle of things right. This is the problem with any plugin type architecture is getting life cycles right. And the way I punted on it forever, like from day one, was basically, hey, I'm going to delete when there's a new fragment come in or something new that's coming in, I'm going to delete everything and rebuild everything because I don't control the DOM. I don't control what else is going on the page. And that worked. Like it's worked until a few weeks ago, right? Like it's been fine. The only thing is there's certain things like if you have durations or set timeouts or some kind of hook in place, that gets reset and that can cause issues for people. It gives it kind of an undefined behavior. People are not used to that. And so, yeah, I was hoping that someone would come in and go, hey, like, this is garbage. I'm going to write a PR and fix this all. And I kept waiting for that person to come. And yeah, they never came. And it's like, okay, people are actively using this beyond me. Like I know how to work around it. So I didn't need to really deal with it, but it is affecting other people. So, okay, my savior is not coming. So be the change you want to see. And so, yeah, the idea is Mutation Observer. I think it can really get overused. But the nice part is Datastar sets up one for the entire DOM and it does it once. And so it's actually a very cheap thing compared to doing all these extra checks and all these other things that's going on. So we have one mutation observer that's looking for every attribute and every element and every change and says, hey, what's going on? So in a way, it's almost like instead of doing an object proxy, you're just doing callbacks that's built into the browser. Again, Datastar is all about what can we use in the browser to make things better. I will say that we are now well over 13K, which kind of sucks, but like we're also doing the correct thing in so many more places than before. Like before, we were just blasting at brute force, which is kind of like a fuel or a carburetor. You're just blasting it in, and you're like, don't know. Whereas a fuel injector is like, depending on the altitude, depending on the situation, depending on barometric pressure, your fuel injector is doing all that work to figure out what's the optimal flow. So, the analogy is spot on. So if anyone's working on cars at all or motorcycles, is exactly what we did. So from
Right.
the outside, it looks declarative. None of your code should really have changed that much, except for we do talk about the ordering issue, but the actual internals changed a lot. But the nice part about declarative approach is that you didn't have to change in your code and you get all these crazy new features and it's actually faster than it was before. So,
Right. And to clarify, declarative means you kind of just state what you want to have happen and that's opposed to imperative where you actually have to spell out the steps. So you just say what you still want to happen and we kind of take care of it within the internals. And the reason that this came up in the first place as something to deal with during the beta is because there were some issues around the timing functions. So those have now been resolved with this change. And I want to say that the engine is now running more optimally, right? Because it's more efficient in
100%.
how it runs. I don't, well, we haven't done any benchmarks around that, but it's pretty certain that when you switch from just doing a clean sweep of all plugins every time something changes to, just being much more precise about when and where you apply plugins, then things are going to get more performant just by default.
Yeah, 100%. There's just less going on, which is good.
Right. The other, the other kind of big addition, although it wasn't to the library, no, it was to the library in the end, was being able to alias or add an alias prefix. So everything now in Datastar is data dash, and then the attribute, of course, hence the name Datastar. We have made it possible to now add a prefix. So if it's, and it can be a custom prefix. So if your prefix is foo, it'll be data dash foo dash, and then the name of the attribute. This has been kind of requested for a while now, and it's been possible for a while now, but it's now part of the bundler. It's also going to work with all of the error handling and everything in the library. So it's kind of like you just define your prefix in your alias prefix in the bundler, and now you're good to go.
Yeah,
We
the
don't
one thing.
actually recommend it. Before you say what you're about to say, we don't really recommend it. There already is a way of ignoring parts of the DOM using an attribute called Datastar ignore. That's in the docs, and I think we're in agreement that you should reach for that before you alias your entire Datastar library. Is that what you were going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say basically the reason why this is valuable is there's times where you may have a legacy system or you may have some CMS that's adding data dash attributes that you don't have control over. I think that's a problem with their library, not ours. But the fact is, we made it so that it's built into the bundler. And what that means is that it's actually built into the website. Like you can go to the website, click at the bottom, change your alias, and go about your day. And now you have that ability. I still think that that's an issue that anybody that's dealing with data-star attributes should be able to make those changes themselves. Just the fact that we made it easier is great, but we also put into the bundler, literally, when you use that feature, we tell you shouldn't be using this feature. Like that's part of the bundle step. So you can't complain later if you're like, well, my stuff doesn't match the examples and all that. It's like, well, yeah, you've decided to take this on, which is fine, but you should only ever use it if you're in some kind of weird legacy thing where you don't control your backend, you don't control your CMS, which kind of goes antithetical to what I think you should be using Datastar for. But there are times with some kind of weird CMS or something that you don't control where you might have to integrate with it. So it's part of brownfields, but do not use it if you're doing a greenfield project. Just ignore it completely.
Yeah. And if you have part of the DOM that you cannot control, you can simply wrap that in data-star-ignore, and Datastar will not process that, and it should work. So that should be the first call of port. And then as a last resort, you can use the alias prefix. Great. We have a few additions to the website as well. We have how-to guides. I think we talked about this a little bit last time. So we have a couple up there, more to come. I'm really happy with how they came out because they kind of combine an example with a mini tutorial. So they kind of walk you through the steps. And I think it's a good foundation on which we can build now as well. We talked about this diataxis thing last time. I won't go into it again, but I did have the thought that diataxis, the name, it comes from Greek. I guess it has a meaning related to documentation, but surely like the number one rule of documentation is pick good names for things. So I think this is kind of ironic that they picked what I would consider not a great name because you read it and you think, what the hell is that? But otherwise, I think the principles are really good. So we're building on top of those. We're fleshing out the website to be determined whether we actually come up with a redesign of the site before V1. It seems like it's low priority if our content is good, if our examples are good, but that is still to be determined. Also, we have some new SDKs. I think this is really exciting because it shows like the range and the diversity in terms of the backend or the people who are getting involved with Datastar and in the community come from this wide range of backgrounds and backends. So we have, I think since last time, we've added Clojure, Rust, and Zig. We have Ruby on the way. I think we have Haskell on the way.
Don't forget
And
Erlang
probably
and Elixir are coming too.
right. So it's kind of crazy. Like soon we're gonna have more SDKs than we have users, I think. Um, no, but we have another milestone we reached is that we passed 1,000 stars on GitHub, which is not
Yeah,
a
it's
metric
amazing.
we care about that much, but it's kind of nice to see once we pass that. We're definitely on a hockey stick chart in terms of growth, and that's kind of nice to see. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our VCs and our sponsors and how we fund this whole thing. Uh, no, I'm kidding. We don't have any. This is purely a passion project for both of us. You primarily because you've been on this train for a very, very long time. But I do want to share something I've been thinking about, which is that this is like really, in my mind, the purest way of building a tool, right? Like we have no financial backing, so we have no pressure in terms of having to produce something or get a return on investment. We have no deadlines. So there's no outside pressure, right? Like we have people making suggestions and we have lots of good ideas coming in. And sometimes that can cause pressure, try to pull us in different directions. But I really feel like we're both uh, keeping our sights on the right way to do this library and this framework. And actually, my wife asked me the other day, we were eating lunch, and she was like, "So, does Delaney have a job, or does he just do free source?" And I'm like, "Free source? What is?" And she's like, "Isn't it free source?" And I'm like, "Oh, free open source software. Yes, yes, it's free source. So it's all free. But Delaney has a job, and I have my commercial plugins to kind of fund this." But thought it would be interesting to ask, what it really is in it for us, and maybe you want to talk about that because you've been on this mission for much longer than I have.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's pretty clear. It's funny when you say there's no pressure. Um, I disagree with that, and the reason why is because I actively use this for work. Like, I work
Hmm.
at Synadia, I work on Nats, I do proof of concepts, and I'm working on some new products in our lineup for enterprise people. And Datastar is an integral part of that. So, like, this is absolutely no shade to Carson at all, but like he doesn't build things in HTMX. Like it's a good, fun project, and he's doing stuff like he's a teacher, a professor at Montana, and that's great. Like it's cool. Like and other people have taken on a lot of those. Like we have different use cases in our situation. Datastar I use actively, and so the good news is that it's been done for me for a while. But now that there's been better APIs and all that stuff, I'm starting to use more of Datastar than I did in the past. Like before, I just used the very basic stuff, ascending on signal, signaling on fragments. But now that the CSS animation stuff has gotten so much better, and there's a lot more tooling in there to make things easier, the fetch indicator's gotten way better. Ref has gotten better. Like everything's gotten better to a place where like it's making my life easier. So for me, the pressure is I have to use it. I have to basically, even with all the stuff we're doing with the Discord and the I have to be saving more time than it would cost me to build it in Vue or React or some other thing. Like I have to see the value in it beyond that to make it worthwhile. So, um, yeah, the thing is that I feel the pressure all the time because this is not I don't make anything off this. I like literally am in a lucky situation where like work wants to see good things and they don't care about like which framework I'm using. It's more about getting products out the door. And that's not for that doesn't happen for everybody. So I'm very lucky in that situation. But yeah, this does take up a lot of time, but like if you're passionate about something, I came from game dev and like there's crunch and all that stuff, but you better love what you do. And so it's about being really wanting to be the better version of yourself. And I feel like Datastar is a good thing. Like the community has made me better and it's made Datastar better. That's great. Like I want to see that. And I can't wait to see the community grow up in a way. In fact, I was talking on the stream last night. I kind of see the long term value of especially the Discord channel and like how we interact with people is I want it to be almost the handmade hero of the web. In that handmade hero, this project Casey Moriarty did was basically said, I'm going to build a game from scratch, like literally from first principles, and we're going to build up, learn all the APIs, learn all the stuff, and show you what that process looks like. I feel like Datastar it gets out of your way so that you learn to be a better. You learn to actually embrace what the browser can do, what your backends can do, what the protocols actually are. Like it's not that Datastar is a big crazy framework with a million plugins and like a big marketplace. No, it's just like changing the way you think about the problems. And I think that's the long-term value of what Datastar does.
So from what I'm hearing, there is pressure at times, but it
Yes.
feels like it is constructive pressure because it
Oh,
is
100%.
forcing you to think about future you, right? So you can do things quicker, achieve things quicker, and the simpler your tools, the more effective you will be at doing that. And I guess I just want to distinguish that between the kind of pressure that I was talking about, which would be like pressure that is pulling us off in the wrong direction or forcing us to take shortcuts or forcing us to not follow the spec, for example.
No, if anything, it's a good kind of pressure because a lot of times people come into the Discord and say, "Hey, have you guys thought about X?" I'm like, "Do you need to use X? Does X show me an example where
Yeah.
you need to use X?" And then they go, "Oh, I just thought it'd be cool." Be like, denied instantly because not that it's not a good idea, but like until you have a real world need, I don't care. Like I just don't care about the theoretical or the academic ideas. Like I want to see it in practice because the thing is, all the theoretical ideas are already in Datastar. Like it has this idea of fine grained reactive programming. It has this idea of fragment based updates and doing compression well, and like it has a lot of those high level academic ideas already done. So you have to really convince me to add something just to add it because it would be cool.
Right. In many ways, I guess we're kind of the gatekeepers because we're trying to keep the core lean and we're trying to keep it um, the direction as focused as possible. And that's going to become even more true, I think, when the stable release comes out because we're saying no breaking changes at that point. Maybe let's define that. What does no breaking changes mean? Like we're talking about semantic versioning. So once we hit 1.0, we'll have point releases and minor releases. But really, we shouldn't be changing anything in the API. And to me, what that means is anything that is documented about the API, right? Because we may change the internals in some ways, but provided we don't break anybody's applications in the way that they're using it that is documented, then we're okay. Do you think we need to expand on that a bit? Like,
Well, one of the things that I think you and I agreed on a little like a while ago when you started joining the project is that there's kind of the problem is we have two different layers, and a lot of people they don't see the value in the plugin architecture that much. They see the value in Datastar, the framework, and I see that as like that's a stopgap because there's probably better ideas or something better happens in the browser or something like that. Like the framework is the best thing that's out there right now. But long term, I don't think that's going to be the case. Someone's going to come up with a better way to do it somewhere along the line. So I think the real value is in the plugins and the architecture of how the plugins work so that you can write things for in the future. Like we're trying to future proof
mhm.
ourselves there. So that's the part where the actual engine I don't think is going to change. Like it's solid and it's in place. But there's plugins and there's ways that of interacting with things that we have gotten wrong in the past. So like the problem is that you have when you say nothing's going to change, are you talking about at the plugin level or the engine level? Because those are two different things. And that's a identity crisis we've been having because I don't think
Mm,
that Datastar is magically the best framework and it's going to stay that way forever. Like it's kind of like React was the best way to do VDOM at the time, but like there's a million ways of doing it now that's better, but there's an ecosystem around it. I don't want that situation to happen to Datastar. I want you to be able to like swap things out later. So the the versioning has been the reason why we haven't gone to beta 1 or to V1 is more to give us that leeway that if we messed anything up. But part of that is all of that has almost completely been at the plugin level. Very little of it had to do with the engine level. So I don't know. Like that's my problem with the
mm.
semantic versioning is we have the semantic versioning of the framework and of the library, and I don't know where that line is personally.
Right. Well, currently we're versioning the framework together, right? The whole thing. So
Hmm.
when you download the JavaScript file, well, there are two versions. You can get the core, the framework, but it's all 1.0, and we're kind of keeping those coupled for now. I don't see us changing that because while there is value in just using the core engine, like you said, like it's the framework. That's the thing that you get the most value out of. But you do bring up a good point. What if people are adding their own plugins? Those are going to be independent of Datastar, the framework, or Datastar core, the library. How do we resolve those two things? But I guess the path that we're on is that we're going to provide as little as possible and as much as necessary within this framework, within the plugin. So you've talked about this, that you only use 3 or 4 tags. I don't know how many we have in total. I guess it's a little over 10.
Yeah.
Plugins that represent attribute plugins and actions. Um, so I think if people have a requirement that is outside of the scope of what we think and what we believe Datastar should do, reach for a plugin. Otherwise, Datastar, the framework, should have you covered pretty much for every use case, besides things that either we choose not to include because we don't think it goes with the ethos, or it's a very edge case and it's very specific to somebody's requirements. There's a topic that I want to cover that I think is needs some clarification. We talk about Datastar as the hypermedia framework. And I've been wondering, should we caveat that with the hypermedia framework for full stack developers? Because what we've been seeing a lot of is people coming in and saying, oh, but can it do optimistic UIs? And um, can it do all these kind of SPA like things that I would like to do? Because that's, I'm a front end developer and that's the world I come from. And I feel like it's important to say we're not, like, Datastar is perhaps not for everybody. If you are uncomfortable working with the backend, maybe it's not for you, because guess what? A big part of Datastar is being able to serve fragments and serve SSE events from the backend. So what's your feeling on that? Should we? And a lot of people have opinions on our marketing. I'm not talking about marketing. I'm talking about like our messaging,
Yeah.
and that could be considered marketing. But our messaging in terms of like, who is this a good fit for, and who is it not a good fit for? Because you're just going to run into issues, or you're not going to be able to. And I know you could, but you're going to run into hurdles if you try to just recreate your SPA app in Datastar.
Yeah. The thing that's so on that conversation I had yesterday, one of the things that I said is that, hey, someone's like, hey, I'm a front end dev. Like all my state lives in the front end. I'm like, okay, how did that front end get served to you? Like, it's not some magical thing that lives in the browser. It came
Yeah.
from the front. It came from the back end. Every HTML, every JSON, everything that it makes up your site came from the back end. The source of truth is your back end, and the client side is an ephemeral state. So the state that lives there is this ephemeral thing that you don't control, the user controls. And I 100%, if you want to believe that the front end is where your state lives for even your components, you're out of your mind, because all that lived in the back end. Like, all of it came from the back end. It's
Hmm.
delivered down in that way. The back end is what drives the JSON and then pulls your thing. If you're doing a spot, like, it's the back end, uh, and you're just wrong. And a lot of people are wrong. And that's why it's funny, because we're like, we are not the library of peace, because we say the SBA people are wrong, and even the pure MPA style of HTMX is wrong too, because not every page needs to be a polling thing. Not every page needs to be an MPA. There's times where you need to update the state with, like, to be what the current state is without changing the URL. Like, there's times when you say, hey, I look at this article and it has this number of tweets or likes or these comments. There is no reason why you shouldn't be able to just update that page as new comments come in a live feed way. There's nothing about that URL that says this can't be streaming. So hypermedia people are kind of missing the point that, like, there's no reason why you can't do streaming. And the SPA people are like, there's no reason why you can't have multiple pages. Like, both of them are wrong. And the point of Datastar in my mind is that we are hypermedia focused. So we're going to use everything the browser is capable of doing. We're not going to try to make it like it's 1999. And we're not trying to make it like it's 2010. We're trying to make it what the current browser in the current state can do. That's where my focus, at least from a messaging standpoint, is that I think you're all wrong, but because you're talking past each other. Like, you both need to do the things that are in both of these places. But just because you do just because we have SPA feature, like the same kind of client side reactivity, doesn't make the idea of optimistic UIs and lying to people a good idea. Like, that's just not the case.
I want to bring up something that Anders, who's very active in our community, said. I pinched this from him. He said, "There's never been a better time for Datastar." And I think this is like a very succinct point, because things like React, you talked about this yesterday, React came from a different time. And even HTMX, which is much more modern in its roots, at least, um, No, not modern in its roots. I wanted to say the opposite. It's been around for a long time in its roots because it came from intercooler, which I think has been around 8 years plus. Um, Datastar is embracing web technologies as they are today, right? So things like HTTP 2 and 3, where you can have concurrent responses, things like view transitions, which are still to be adopted by all browsers, but it's almost certainly coming. Cross-document view transitions, which allows kind of
Speculation rules.
right. All of these things we talked about mutation observer that's been around for a bit longer, but it's a very solid API. It's part of the core JavaScript engine. There is a CSS rule called starting style I just discovered, which could remove the whole concept of settling that we have built in when you want to do fade animations or any animations when you swap parts of the DOM out. So I feel like Datastar is on the cusp of embracing web technologies and what it has to offer without having to deal with like all of the legacy stuff from years ago.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and that's why it does feel weird when there was a talk at Big Sky Conference. I forget who did it, that basically said, "Hey, this back end guys and the front end guys need to talk to each other, because you both have good ideas." It's like, yeah, that's what a full stack developer should know. You don't have to be a master of CSS. You don't have to be a master
Yes.
of every back end technology, but you should be able to have a sane conversation between the two of you. Like, there's always going to be people that are more front end focused and more design focused and all that. Like, but you should be able to set up your own routes, and you should be able to say, here's what my data should look like. Here's what my fragment should look like. And the fact that you're doing it in the back end, and you're using JSX or Temple or any of the other things, it's the same problem. Like, you're still laying things out and doing that thing. Like, it's not some magic thing because it's in TSX or whatever. And the backend people have to be able to make actually understand what elements are and what CSS is. Even if they do something that's semi unstyled, they still need to be able to get stuff on the page. They still need to understand that part. So
Right.
yes, I think it's for full stack developers, but I think there can be more overlap than there is right now, even if you're more specialized.
Yeah. One could even say Datastar is a full stack framework. Even
Yeah.
though the library is 13 kilobytes of JavaScript, in the end, we have all these SDKs available. We have
So
that.
here's the one thing that's really interesting is that over time, if you look at the actual usage of if you go to GitHub, we have a kind of a mono repo, and over time, the amount, even though the site is written in Go, and I'm a Go developer, and the engine, I was going to say the game engine is written in TypeScript, like, it's becoming less and less of the actual usage, because we have Zig and we have Clojure and we have like all these other things that are starting to take up more space. And the thing is, even the TypeScript stuff is really big right now in comparison to what the engine is, because we have the SDKs that are written to be able to work in Hano and Dino and like
On
all these different.
TypeScript.
And then that's written in TypeScript. So the actual engine part that is TypeScript is tiny. If you go back a bit and you saw how big it is, you're talking 30 kilobytes uncompressed. It's just so little code, but all these other programs are like, you're seeing more of a community, and the code is more about the community and how to use and like embrace your backend language and yet still talk the same thing. One of the nice things I think we did well with the protocol is, now that we've agreed, because SSE is its own protocol, but it's very, very simple. And Datastar has its own kind of meta protocol on top of that for dealing with fragments and signals and JS and all this stuff. So the nice part is there's not a lot for someone. You implement 6 functions and you now have a protocol, but every single person, I don't care if you're in Clojure or Haskell or Elixir, if you show us what your actual SSE outputs are and you show us what your fragments are, we can help each other. And I think that's the real value, is the community part of it. And I feel like we got that right.
Yeah, and I still think there's value in everybody actually visiting the reference page we have on SSE and seeing what those SSE events look like. They're just plain text. It's like a no-brainer. I think it's good to understand that before you jump into the SDKs, because the SDKs are not doing magic. They're a very, very thin layer that simply makes it, easier for you to just get up and running with your backend. And they'll be there. They'll take care of consistency. We're not planning on changing any defaults, but all of those defaults, that we have code generation, that those defaults go into both the library and each of the SDKs. So it's a pretty cool system. There's no way of those things getting out of sync, which is another benefit of why you might want to use the SDK over writing your own. If you end up writing your own for a language that we don't have support for, just chat with us, and if you're willing to contribute it, we'll happily merge it in if it's follows the spec that we have outlined.
Yeah, even though that conversation was actually like 5 hours and 40 minutes, one of the things we talked about towards the end, I don't know if this actually was on camera or afterwards, but we were talking about basically, because he's doing a game engine thing right now, and we were talking about making a single C header file that has a HTTP 1.1 server and includes Datastar in it as an amalgamation. So there's a chance that we'll literally have a single header C version as well, because it's so simple. He's probably going to do it on his stream, like we'll go back and forth a bit, but that's the kind of the power, is that you can now have something that's like a single header in C, or you can be in PHP or Python, and we're all talking the same like language of how to get stuff to the front end. Like there's something beautiful about that I'm like, super excited about, is that I think that's getting people on the same page is great. And I feel like that's the kind of the problem that I've seen, at least with HTMX, is that there's a lot, like if you go and look at their channel, there's a billion different languages that don't talk to each other. And like once you get the very basics of a fragment on page, now you're completely on your own. Like there's nothing about that real-time interactive. Like as soon as you want to do interactivity, now each person's gonna like, am I gonna add Alpine? Am I gonna add hypermedia? Like there's no unified like vision of what the front end and of a full stack can be. So there's a lot more disparity. Whereas the only things you see in the individual channels is someone saying, like, oh, I like this library, I like this library. But Datastar is unified between all of them, if that makes sense. Like it's more unified than what I've seen in the HMX community.
Yep. Spiro, I think, is big into live streaming, so it'd be cool if he was to live stream his C implementation. Or he also mentioned that he has an upcoming project to do in Laravel, and he could use Datastar in there. So it would be cool to see if he does some live streaming. I don't think we have much of that. Neither you nor I are big into live streaming.
No, not at all.
But if other people take that on, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, in fact, it would be interesting. I would like to see you go on there, because you wrote the Laravel SDK, is going on there and me seeing what's going on in PHP, because I've heard that it's gotten better and that it's not like it used to be. And I would be interested. I just don't have the cycles to do it myself. But at the same time, if I can watch it and see what you guys are up to, there's value in knowing that. Like it's kind of funny that Datastar gets used in places that I'm like, I have no idea. Like good luck. But at the same time, I want to see it succeed, because if you can get through to people that use Laravel and the PHP, now that's half the web that you can get off this crazy train, right? Like that, there's value in that.
Yeah, I've been messaging Lazarus. He has, is it still called HX Pod? I'm not sure.
I think so, yeah.
I know that he's trying out Datastar with PHP, with the PHP SDK and the Laravel SDK. Even Taylor Otwell of Laravel tweeted out something about adding better support for SSE, which is interesting that these messages are being kind of sent around through the wire, or whispers, and I guess it's being picked up at different corners of the internet. Well, so it's interesting to see that happen.
I don't know if he had any idea of even what Datastar is, though. I kind of tweeted back a little thing like, gee, it would be great if someone had already done this. Oh, wait, like we did. I don't know if he actually watched that or listened to it. I didn't get a like from him or anything like that. So like part of this is always messaging, and you think that because you live and breathe it, that other people must know about it. And like, I don't know what the right answer is there. And also, like, you almost have to get burned by this stuff to really see the value in Datastar right now. I just I wish that wasn't the case, but it really feels that way. I don't know how to get around that. But the thing is that the guy behind Laravel is going to be so smart and so good at handling this stuff that he's not going to see it as a problem, right? He's not going to see the issues that other people see. So I don't know. It'll be interesting to have a conversation with him. I would love to say, here's what we're trying to do. Because I feel like the site's getting better every day, and that's awesome. But I do feel like every time I can actively talk to someone and have a conversation, they fall in love with the ideas of Datastar right away, because they get where the passion is, and they get that we're trying to simplify things. We're not trying to carve out our little fiefdom. We're just trying to make it so that we never have to think about this again. It's a different vibe than most frameworks. I want to get away from that.
Yeah, and I don't want to turn this into a PHP podcast, but I mean Laravel has two big or well-known approaches to dealing with interactivity on the front end, and one of those is Inertia.js, which is more the SPA world, and the other one is Livewire. Yeah, Laravel Livewire. And that is more the kind of HTMX approach with Alpine. So it's Alpine plus Livewire together. It is one cohesive solution, but it is more that model of fetch response rather than SSE. So I think even if people are not hearing about Datastar directly, they're probably hearing about SSE. I think a lot of people associate Datastar with SSE. It is one of the things that Datastar
It's
does, but
just a
not the only
plugin,
thing.
guys.
Yeah,
It's
it's just
just
a
a
plugin.
plugin.
But I think with Datastar getting more popular, I think people are going to start hearing more about and learning more about SSE and its potential advantages. And that's possibly what happened in this case, but I don't want to assume too much. So maybe we could wrap that part up by asking the question, because Carson Gross of HTMX has an article or an essay called "When Should You Use Hypermedia?" And there he actually spells out when he thinks you should and when you should not. I wanted to kind of play on that question and ask you, when should you not use Datastar? When is it probably not the right tool for you?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question, and it seems to keep coming up. And here's my problem with Carson's approach in this situation. He says when you should use hypermedia, and what he should have said is when you should use HTMX, because those are very different things. Guess what? When you should use hypermedia is when you want to deploy to the browser. That's it. Like, even when it comes to things like, hey, I want to just make one big canvas and I want to do WebGL, I still think that hypermedia and web components and stuff is a great way to drive that, especially from the back end. So it's one of those things of when you should use hypermedia, when you're using a browser. Like,
Because the
end of
browser is a hypermedia client.
that is literally what it's built to. It's built to be a hypermedia client. So I think Carson is completely wrong. And that's my problem right now is that people associate hypermedia with HTMX, but it's not. I think that Datastar is far more hypermedia focused, as in what hypermedia is today. HTMX is amazing at solving the problems of the early 2000s. It solves those problems. It solves most of the issues that we had with the way that we were doing one thread per request style stuff and doing polling. It solves it. It's great. It's amazing. But that's not the world we live in now. So I think that like extending HTML to the problems of back then will only get us so far. So my thing is, if you think that a hypermedia client is not the right approach, probably you should be doing something native. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's times when like a native application is going to be better. It just is. But those days are getting shorter and shorter because things like the HTTP3 and the quick spec and things around web transport, all these things are like actually making it so that even native apps are not going to be able. It's going to be just as easy to build it in the hypermedia of the future. So we aren't there yet, but there's times when native apps and mobile apps make more sense. They just do. And the thing is, you should embrace that. But I will say people that shouldn't use Datastar are people that aren't willing to unlearn the bad habits that have come up. And I'm saying bad habits from the SPA side and the MPA side. Like there's bad habits on both sides. And you just, if you can like close your eyes and unlearn the thing that like, it's just hypermedia, guys. That's what it is at the end of the day. And like, you have to learn what the client is capable of. That's it. Like, I just think that a lot of people think that like, I can't do X feature from X framework. It's like, okay, but is that a hypermedia concept or is that the concept inside of that extra abstraction? Because the problem is, I said this on the podcast last night, is abstractions are DSLs, which domain specific languages. Like when you add an abstraction, you're adding like a little mini DSL of like, makes it easier for me to work with this concept. The problem is if you add a DSL and then you make a DSL on top of that and a DSL, more and more abstractions, if you pick the wrong underlying concept of what it is, you're going to have a bad time. Like the whole idea of React and the VDOM is to basically say, we're going to make it so that you don't have to think about what's actually happening in the browser. Well, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard of. Like you need to actually understand what's happening in the browser if you want to be efficient and you want to understand what's going on. And there's the irony, we've talked about this before, there's nothing faster than a big blob of strings because that's what the browser is meant to do is take a bunch of strings and turn them into DOM elements. Like that's what it's good at. So the problem is the problem. And I think people that don't want to embrace that are going to have a really hard time with Datastar because a lot of times they'll say, I want to do X. And it's like, well, that's already built into the browser, or you shouldn't do that for like ethical reasons. And they don't like that because it's not a technical issue, it's an ethical issue.
So it sounds like the more abstractions you have, the more complexity you're introducing, and you're just going to slow things down. And you should build for the platform that you're building for, right? If you're building for the browser, use hypermedia. If you're building for native, use native technologies. We have a topic that I want to get into, a different topic, and this stems from something that is on the homepage of datastar.dev. If anyone has not seen this, go check this out. We have a little to do demo, and if you open that in two separate browser tabs or windows, have them side by side, and you check one, you'll see that happen immediately on the other one. A lot of people, I think, don't realize that the demo can do that. We maybe have to be more explicit about that, but it is a pretty cool thing to see. And of course, this isn't just tracking you. This, if other people interact with it, you'll see it too. Is that right?
Yeah.
So this is happening how? CQRS. Do you want to break that down for us and explain how this actually works?
Sure. And just to be clear, it happens for every individual browser session independently because it's actually tied to a session ID inside of your like cookie thing. So if it's shared within the same like browser tab thing. So each person actually gets their own version of it. But
I see.
if
Okay.
that way so that people aren't messing with each other and like sending profanity to each other and stuff. Like if you want to send it to yourself, cool, good luck. So
that's good to know because I was going to type Ben was here when you were showing it yesterday in the live stream, and I decided not to. But it wouldn't have had any effect. Anyway.
You wouldn't have had any effect. So the whole thing, and this seems to be coming up over and over again. And the reason why is because this is just such a beautiful idea for the back end that I think that it's going to get more embraced more and more by the Datastar community. And CQRS and event sourcing are these two concepts you'll hear me say a ton about because it's one of those key things that once you understand it, it infects your brain. And the first thing is CQRS stands for Command Query Responsibility Segregation. And all that means is that you separate your writes from your reads. That's it. And that's like, oh, well, why is that an interesting concept? And the thing is, the to-do, for example, every time when you first load up the page, it basically it checks your cookie if you have one, or if you don't, it creates a new object, puts it into a key value store. That's the state of your to-do. So the entire to-do lives in the state of this key value store. Cool. Every time I want to do a command of like, change a toggle, make a new line, do all this kind of stuff, what happens is a command gets sent off as a post or a delete or a put that says, hey, I want to do this action. So what happens is it pulls down that key, checks to see that it can make that action and updates it. Notice that most of the time when you see people do a post, they'll get back the results from it, like from a DB table or something. That is wrong. And here's why, is that all you're doing is sending a request saying, I would like to do this. I'm not in control. Here's what I would like to do. Here's what I'd like to happen. And you can get either an ack or a knack back. Basically, that's it. That's all you get back is like saying, yes, I did it, or no, I didn't. And that's it. And so that's happening with every single event basically does a post. And in this case, it's a 200 back. There's not even a text type or anything like that. It's just a 200 back. Cool. So you've made these changes to your state. The thing is that what if multiple people are trying to make changes to the state? Well, you're going to be pulling in and you're going to be doing a transaction. You might say, nah, I can't do that. And it's up to the front end to say, well, do I want to retry or do I want to do something else? Like it doesn't know, like you don't know the current state. Okay. So that's how commands work. You're just basically sending something up and you're getting a 0 response. What happens from there is there's a couple things. We're not going to even talk about event sourcing. We're just talking about the key value store is that there's a key that changed. On the read side, when you first open up the page, there's a get that gets opened up like /updates on the to-do, I think it is. And when it loads, it says, I'm going to look at the cookie and I'm going to subscribe to any changes to the key associated with my cookie. Now, it doesn't have to be a cookie. It could be here's a broadcast thing, here's a chat. It doesn't matter. You can be something that multiple people are looking at the same time. Doesn't matter, but I'm going to look at this key. And what happens is one of the nice things that's built into NAS is this key value has the ability to do push updates. So instead of trying to constantly pull the key value to see if something's changed, you can get a push indication that something changed. Well, that's amazing because, go ahead, Ben.
So that was going to be my question. How do you subscribe to changes to those events? And you said you're using that, so that has that built into it.
Yeah, and any system that has an event bus can do this. The one thing that's really nice about NAS is it has persistence just built in. So it's very easy to have a persistent key value store that also has push interfaces. No, most key values don't have push to tell you when an individual key gets updated. So every time that something happens, one of the nice things about the key value built into NAS is that when you first subscribe, it gives you what the current state of that key is. And then from then on, it basically pushes down the latest version of it, if that makes sense. So
Yeah.
from that, I just take the current state, render it to a component, and send down that component. That's it. There's no other steps. So the thing is that when you have the read side, your read side can be completely different depending on what's going on. So that command to change the to-do app, in our case, we just have one reader that's or multiple people that are looking at the fragments that are coming down. But let's say we had a marketing department that says, hey, we see that these kinds of users at this time of day are making these kinds of to-dos, like they're making it for coffee and all that stuff. Maybe we try to find a way to get a coupon into them for a coffee at this time. So the projection of what is the view of those events that happen and what's the state of the system is completely different for the marketing department as it is for the guy doing his editing department. It's completely different from another guy that's doing auditing of how many resources we're using, what's our network traffic, all this stuff. So the idea is that one set of state changes in commands have completely different views and completely different semantics for the people listening on the other side. So by separating your commands from your queries, you can have the ability to change things out. So one of the things that's hard is that if you sit to a post and got back a result, well, what if you want to switch out the result to do I want to do 25% traffic to a different view of this thing. Like I want to change a different style. That's really hard because you basically have to now mess with the one that's currently working. Whereas if you do it in a query separation way, I can spin up a whole new query, a whole new view, and then basically switch between them at will. It could be 20% or 80%. It basically allows you to separate things in a way that are so much easier to scale, so much easier to cognitively load. It's almost like having what the promise of microservices is kind of goes away if you actually have the idea that queries are like these perfect views of what's going on. And part of this too is each query can have its own database. It can have its own idea of what to track and what's indexable, which means that everyone has a perfect index for the exact question that they're asking. And there's something there that it's hard to explain to someone that if you treat your events as the source of truth and your databases as just something that can be ephemeral, that it could go away and you could create a new one. Now all of a sudden you get this superpower.
So now you're
I don't know
getting
how.
into event sourcing. Yeah. But let's stick with the example because I just want to summarize in terms of the to-do app what's actually happening. If that's
Yeah,
okay. And you
please
tell
do.
me if I've missed anything. So when you open up the page, that to-do app sends a GET request to the server, and that opens up this long-lasting SSE connection, which stays open for the duration of the session that you're on that page. Anytime you make a change, you're sending a post or put or delete up to the server, and you don't get anything back. It's not your traditional request response, and you just display the response. You're just sending one command, do this, and
Try to do
I'm done.
this.
Try to do this, yes. And then it's up to that long-lasting connection to send down changes that may have just happened based on the action that you took, or may have happened in a different browser window based on actions that took place there. But you're segregating that process of writing to the event bus and reading back down from the event bus. It's almost like analogous to writes and reads from the database, right? You write to the database, you don't get something back. You have to read back to make sure that you have the latest information.
Yeah, that's 100% right. And the thing that I would just make sure to be clear about is that that command could have came from the browser. It could have came from a CLI. It could have came from a cron job. It could have come from anywhere. And it's the same situation of like, you only know the state when it's valuable. And also one of the things that people always talk about scale and stuff, there's nothing, if you want to actually have true, never get out of sync with state, which is really important for anything in medical or military and so that you always end up going to basically a position of a single writer, multi-reader, which means there's one person that's allowed to write. And if you have one person that's allowed to write, then all of a sudden whether you're doing it with checks and sets or with a single literal writer that's in charge of this stuff, your throughput goes through the roof because there's no contention going on to try to get access to that thing. So if you have a single writer, you can do crazy speed, and then most of the time you're spent querying. But if you can shard that out to multiple projectors and bake perfect indexes, then you can go to crazy scales, even on the same machine. And the other thing that I want to make sure that people are clear about is the to-do app is like 100 lines total. Like, this is not harder or bigger than doing it the way you're used to doing it. It's just putting code in a slightly different place. It's not big. It's not hard. It's just changing your mental model. It's more of a mental model than a framework or anything else.
Yeah, and this is one very simple example that could be taken to a whole range of applications like collaborative editing and all that kind of stuff, right? You talked about, or you are talking about perhaps doing a spreadsheet built, a collaborative spreadsheet built in Datastar. And I'm sure that would take advantage of Nats and this event bus, because that's really the only way you could do it, right?
Yeah, I don't see how you would go about doing it, let alone not only would I want to make a collaborative one, I also want to have it where there's a full timeline where you can literally scrub to any point in time and know who was changing what when. So that's the kind of thing that just is normal to me. Like, of course, you want to know who changed what when in a spreadsheet.
Right.
There's a good old saying that like accountants don't use pencils, right? Like, you write stuff down and you can't change time. And because I've worked in like really heavily regulated spaces where there's real world consequences, that to me is the starting point. And the one thing that especially about, like, we haven't really talked about event sourcing, but the thing is, the mental model that you need to have in your head is that as soon as you have update or delete in your database or in your source of truth, you are losing data. And it's something that people need to understand, because a lot of times people don't, like, if anything, big data has taught us you don't know the value of data until it's too late, because you can be throwing away a lot of stuff. And a perfect example of that is someone will say, like, hey, I added something into a shopping cart and then I took it out and put it into my save for later and then I put it back. Is that the same as someone just saying, I put it in my shopping cart? The
No.
answer is no. No, it's very different, because you're like, how long did they keep it in their safe for later? Was it a certain time of month? Are they like, is it around paycheck time? Like, there's all these things that happen. Like, did it go on sale? Like, there's all these queries that you would love to be able to ask that in a normal situation you can't. So it's just something to realize. We don't probably have enough time to get into full event sourcing and what that means. But the general idea is that, like, these ideas of CQRS, and I do want you to explore, people that start looking at event sourcing, we can have a whole conversation about it. But the idea is, you need to understand the value of your data, and you need to understand the value of your process, like taking ownership of that and knowing when you're throwing things away and when you shouldn't be throwing things away. And just being adults. Like, I don't know, like, it's one of those things of, like, if you build things in it, if you kind of look at the uh the academics and the people actively building in this space, you'll see that you all of a sudden get these superpowers. Like, the fact that I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to make a collaborative time history version of a spreadsheet, and this is like exactly the kind of thing that Carson said you should not do in hypermedia. And I just think he's dead wrong, because it's the only place where you could pull it off. Like, it's just no other place could you say, anywhere in the world from any connected device, I can have an interactive spreadsheet and do it in like 13K of JS. Okay, I'm ready to prove it. Someone has to be able to prove me wrong. So, yeah, I've had some internet arguments, and we've been busy with the site and all that stuff. But I do think that my demo of this should put to rest a lot of the like, oh, you can't do this, or oh, SPAs are better, or MPAs are better, or you can't do this in an MPA. The problem is, I think everyone's wrong right now, but for the right reasons.
One thing I'll say about event sourcing, what really helped it click for me was to think of it as an audit trail, right? So you keep a trail of all of the events that happened. That's your event source. And the data that's currently in your database or in your view, that's a projection of what happened. But the source of truth is that audit trail, and you keep that around. That's the most valuable asset you have.
Yeah, and this is, we can talk about this real quick, is that a lot of people, when you see large scale systems, where is all of their like huge data coming from, is trying to like sift logs. They're trying to like recreate state when it would have been so much easier to actually have the state in the first place. And it's actually less data overall. So the thing to keep in mind with all this stuff is that you always want to know who's in control. And the way I look at it is that your persistent source of events is your source of truth, because you can recreate any SQL database. You can say, oh, I want this to be OLTP, so I want it to be in SQLite. Or I say, oh, this is an OLAP thing, I want it to be in DuckDB. Or I want it to be in Postgres. Or I want it to be in a graph database. Or I want it to be a vector thing for an LLM. All of those can be defined once you have the series of events that led up to it. So like your projectors are your databases, and the databases can be ephemeral, and it's cattle, not pets. That's the thing. Once you have that mental model that the events are your source of truth and everything is derived from those, it really changes the way you look at data in general. And most problems are actually get a lot easier because you can break them down.
Right. As long as you have your events, you can rebuild the state of the world at the current point in time or at any point in time in the past. Great. We've covered everything I had on my list. Is there anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, the one thing that was interesting, I don't know if we covered this at all before, but I will say that Anders had got into regex hell. He was trying to help out. It's one of the major again, it was an area that I was hoping someone would come around and help with, and they did. So I want to put a shout out that that's the kind of stuff that's really ugly, and it's one of the larger, even though it's one line, it's one of the larger contributions we've had to the actual engine. Because it's something that I punted on forever, because I'm like, I don't do these silly things, but someone's gonna. And he really took on the mantle. And I will say, people don't realize Datastar is like 400 lines of actual like real engine code. Like there's some signal features and stuff off to the side, but like the real engine is like maybe 250 lines of actual code, and most of that is around like taking the Datastar attributes and parsing them in a way that's usable, and then also setting up the signals or the reactive expression stuff. That's it. That's all it does. And the thing is, people don't realize that that's just some regex and some glue. That's literally like Datastar is just a pile of regex. And it's pretty funny because yeah, regex is a problem, but there's no other option in JS unless you want to write your own language to deal with this stuff. So it's been quite a journey, and it's good to see someone else getting in the code there. So I just want to put a shout out that one little change is made it way more robust to people being silly in their expressions. So
I think you're downplaying it a little bit. There's more to the engine. You've done an amazing job on it. I read the source code. And I said this to you kind of in jest the other day. I feel like over a long enough timeline, every line of code will be rewritten eventually, and you'll be banned from the project.
Yeah, I hope so. I can't wait to be banned. I'm literally looking forward. I'm already not a mod anymore, so it's pretty great. I can't wait to get booted from the server.
Yeah, we can change your title to head troublemaker. How about that?
Not a cult leader is pretty good as a troublemaker. The thing is that I will never be good at the social stuff as Carson, but I will definitely cause us enough trouble if that's the role that is needed from me. But also, I see there's also a half-life to that, right? Like constantly saying like we're the underdogs, we're better. My fear is that we get so big that like I can't pull that card anymore.
Yeah.
But I think the one value that I have is that I can make some demos for us that like people will not be able to ignore, especially if it's in conference talks and stuff like that. Like that's where I think my value to the project overall. Like, yeah, I can be a little snarky and all that stuff, but I think over time there's going to be people that understand what I'm trying to say, but can be nicer about it, and they're going to be the people that are actually valuable to the project. Like my role has a finite limit to when it's valuable. And I get that. Like I already know that. Like I will soon walk the desert blind on my golden path. So
well, you came here to build a tool, and that mission has kind of coming to an end, and then after that point it's like, what role do you want to play in it? It's completely up to you. All right. Thanks, Delaney.
yeah,
this has
thank
been
you guys.
a good conversation, and we'll see everyone next time.
See ya.